The Reeve family wedding was held in September at a vineyard in the Hudson Valley that my brother Daniel had found through a contact, booked through another contact, and described in approximately 40 conversations over the preceding 18 months. The vineyard was genuinely beautiful. The kind of place that photographs well from every angle, that was designed, in some essential way, to be the background of a significant occasion. Daniel had an eye for that, for the setting that elevated the event, for the backdrop that made everything in front of it look intentional. He had always been good at settings. He was 38 years old. He worked in communications, corporate communications, the specific craft of shaping how large institutions presented themselves to the public. He was talented at it. The talent was real, the instinct for language that landed, for the narrative that moved the right people in the right direction, for the construction of a version of events that was accurate enough to be defensible and crafted enough to be useful. He had built a career on this. He had built a reputation, a firm of 20 people, a client list that included 2 Fortune 500 companies and a senator whose communications strategy had shifted measurably in the 2 years since Daniel had taken the account. He was also, at 38, about to marry Priya Anand, who was an architect, who was kind and precise and who had, in the 2 years I had known her, demonstrated a quality of attention to Daniel that he had needed for a long time without knowing he needed it. I was glad about Priya. I was glad about the wedding. I was less glad about the rehearsal dinner. ******. My name is Caroline Reeve. I am 34 years old. I am Daniel's younger sister by 4 years, which had been, for most of our lives, the primary organizing fact of how our family understood us, Daniel first, then Caroline, the specific grammar of older and younger siblings that assigns roles early and adjusts them slowly if at all. I had spent my career in a field that did not translate easily into dinner party conversation. I was an epidemiologist, not the public-facing version, not the kind who appeared on television during outbreaks to explain transmission rates to a general audience, though I had done that once and found it less useful than it looked. I worked on the structural side, the modeling, the surveillance systems, the early detection infrastructure that exists underneath the visible response to any public health event. I had spent 10 years building systems that were designed to notice things before they became noticeable. Before the cases became clusters. Before the clusters became the kind of thing that required press conferences. I worked for a federal agency. I could not discuss most of what I worked on. This was not a legal restriction exactly, it was more the practical reality that the work existed at an intersection of ongoing surveillance and operational sensitivity that made discussing it in casual contexts both imprecise and inadvisable. What I could say, at family dinners and wedding rehearsals and the various occasions at which people asked what I did, was public health, federal level, disease surveillance and early response systems. This landed, reliably, as something medical, something governmental, probably quiet. Daniel's version, established years ago and never revised, was that I worked in public health, which was admirable, which was important in a background sort of way, which did not generate the kind of narrative his work generated. She's in public health, he would say. Very noble. She lives for the work. She doesn't really have a life outside it, which is, that's Caroline. I had heard some version of this many times. I had not corrected it. Not because the correction was unavailable. Because the correction required a conversation I had not wanted to have, in contexts that were not the right contexts, with an audience for whom the full version would require more foundation than the occasion allowed. I had my reasons. They were sufficient. The rehearsal dinner was at the vineyard's main hall, long tables, candles, the amber light of a September evening coming through windows that framed the rows of vines outside. Priya's family had come from Chicago and from London. Daniel's friends from the firm, from college, from the accumulated social geography of a man who had always been good at keeping people. My parents were at the head table. I was 3 seats down from Daniel on the same side, which meant I could hear him clearly and he could not see my face without turning. The toasts began at 8:30. Daniel's best man spoke first, a college friend named Greg, whose toast was warm and slightly too long and contained 3 stories that I had heard versions of before. The laughter was genuine. Daniel received it well, in the practiced way of a man who was comfortable being the subject of a room's affection. Then Daniel stood. This was not the formal toast, that was the next evening. This was the rehearsal dinner remarks, the informal version, the night before gratitude and light comedy that these events traditionally accommodated. Daniel was good at this. He had written remarks. He did not use them, he spoke from the shape of them, which was a specific skill, the ability to seem spontaneous within a prepared structure. He thanked Priya's family. He thanked his own parents. He thanked his friends. Then he turned, slightly, toward me. And my sister, he said. Caroline. Who is here, which, honestly, is an achievement, because Caroline does not come to things. Caroline works. Caroline has always worked. She was working when I got my first job, she was working when I started the firm, she was working when I got engaged. He smiled. She lives in her work, she lives, a little bit, I say this with love, in my shadow. Because Daniel Reeve's weddings don't happen every day and even Caroline puts down the spreadsheets for one. Laughter. Warm, directed at me, the friendly laughter of people who don't know me. I smiled. I was good at smiling at these moments. I had learned it years ago, the specific expression that reads as gracious and registers as nothing, that gives the room what it needs without giving anything real. Daniel raised his glass. The room drank. My mother, beside my father, looked at her hands for a moment. My father looked at the table. They had heard this before, in other forms, the casual diminishment that used the language of affection and carried something else beneath it, something that none of us had ever named directly. The dinner continued. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. The stranger was sitting at a table near the back of the hall. I had noticed him when I came in, not with attention, with the peripheral awareness of someone who had spent years in rooms where the configuration of people mattered. He was perhaps 65, white-haired, with the quality of stillness that some people develop over a long time in fields that require sustained patience. He was seated with Priya's family, on the periphery of Priya's family, I would later understand, in the way of a guest who was connected to the occasion through a side relationship rather than a central one. He was Dr. Samuel Okafor. I did not know this at the dinner. I would learn it afterward. He was the former director of the CDC's Center for Emerging and Zoonotic Infectious Diseases, a position he had held for 9 years before moving to advisory work with the WHO. He was in the Hudson Valley because he was an old friend of Priya's uncle, who had invited him as a +1 to the rehearsal dinner and who had mentioned, in passing, that the groom's sister worked in public health. He had been, at 6:15 that evening, introduced to me by Priya's uncle. I had recognized his name. He had not recognized mine, there was no reason he should have, my work being the kind that did not attach names to its outcomes in any visible way. We had spoken for 8 minutes. He had asked, in the way of someone with genuine professional curiosity, what specifically I worked on. I had told him, in more detail than I usually provided at social events, because he was someone who had the context to receive the specifics, and because the conversation was real rather than the social performance of information exchange. He had listened. He had asked follow-up questions that indicated he was tracking the actual content rather than waiting for a pause. Then the dinner was called to order and we had gone to our respective tables. 40 minutes after Daniel's toast, Dr. Okafor stood up. He did not have a microphone. He did not need one. He had, evidently, the kind of voice that had addressed rooms for decades, not loud, but with the carrying quality of someone who had learned that volume is the wrong tool and had developed better ones. He simply stood, and something about the quality of his standing communicated that something was happening, and the room quieted. I apologize, he said. I am a guest here in an indirect capacity. I don't have a prepared toast. This is not a toast. He looked around the room. I was introduced this evening to someone I did not previously know by name, he said. Though I knew her work. He was looking in my direction. I was still. I want to correct something, he said. Not with any antagonism, I don't know this family well enough to have antagonism, and I've been told the remark was made with affection. But in my experience, affectionate inaccuracies compound over time, and I have spent enough years in this field to know that leaving the record inaccurate has consequences. He paused. Caroline Reeve, he said. The room had gone very quiet. Most of the people in this room have no reason to know what that name represents. That's appropriate. The work she does is not designed to be visible. The work she does is, by design, invisible, because if it's working correctly, the thing it prevents never happens, and a thing that never happens generates no headlines and requires no names attached to it. He looked at Daniel briefly. Not unkindly. You said your sister lives in your shadow, he said. I'd like to tell this room what your sister has actually been doing. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. He spoke for 6 minutes. I know it was 6 minutes because I was, in that period, conducting the specific internal accounting of a person in a situation they did not engineer and cannot stop, measuring duration, monitoring the room, maintaining the expression that read as composed because composed was the only available option. He told them about the surveillance work. Not the classified components, nothing that required clearance to discuss, nothing that would have been inappropriate in a public setting. The architecture of it. The system's design. The years of building early detection infrastructure that had, on 2 occasions that he named specifically, provided the lead time that allowed a coordinated federal response before a situation became unmanageable. He mentioned the name of one of those occasions. It was the name of an outbreak that had been in the news 4 years ago, briefly, because it had been contained quickly, because the early response had worked, because the containment had looked, from the outside, like the thing going right rather than almost going wrong. The kind of outcome that generated a paragraph in the press, a few days of coverage, and the general impression that the system had functioned as it was supposed to. The system functioned, Dr. Okafor said, because someone had spent 3 years building the detection infrastructure that made the early identification possible. The response team received a lead time of 11 days. In outbreak terms, 11 days is a great deal. It is the difference between a regional situation and a national one. Possibly more than that. He did not say my name again. He didn't need to. I am not in the habit of doing this, he said. Standing up at someone else's family event and making remarks I was not invited to make. But I was told, at this table, that Caroline Reeve lives in her brother's shadow. He paused. I wanted the record to be accurate before the wedding. He sat down. The room was very quiet. Then it wasn't. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. I looked at my glass. The specific moment after something like that, the moment when the room is recalibrating, when the sound level is returning but the texture of the sound is different, when the people near you are looking at you with the adjusted expression of people revising a picture they thought they had, that moment requires a particular stillness. Not performance. Actual stillness. The practice of having a great deal happening internally and none of it visible, which was a discipline I had been developing for most of my career. My mother had her hand over her mouth. My father was looking at me. Daniel was looking at the table. Priya, beside him, was not looking at the table. She was looking at me, and her expression was the specific expression of someone who is not surprised by the information and is, in some way she would not say aloud tonight, glad it was said. She caught my eye. I looked back at her. I had liked Priya from the beginning. I trusted, now, that she had known more about this than she had ever said. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Daniel found me on the terrace at 9:45. The evening had continued, as evenings continue, with the specific momentum of a thing that will not be derailed by a single interruption, and the room had returned to dinner and wine and conversation, and I had participated in it, correctly, in the way you participate in the surface of events when the deeper level needs time to settle. I was outside when he came through the door. He stood beside me. For a while he didn't say anything. The Hudson Valley at night in September, the sound of insects, the shape of the vineyard in the dark, the ambient light from the hall behind us. I didn't know, he said. I know, I said. The outbreak. The one he named. He paused. That was yours. That work belonged to a team, I said. My contribution was a specific component. Caroline. Yes. Don't do that, he said. Don't compress it. I looked at him. The surveillance infrastructure, he said. The 11 days. That was you. Substantially, I said. He was quiet. Why didn't you tell me, he said. I thought about the honest answer. Because your version of me was already established, I said, and because the work doesn't require your version to be accurate in order to function. The outcomes are the same whether you know or not. He absorbed this. He stopped. What? I said. That's a very cold way to think about your brother, he said. I considered this. It's not cold, I said. It's accurate. I learned a long time ago that what I do doesn't depend on the understanding of the people around me. That was a useful thing to learn. It made the work sustainable. But. There's no but, I said. There's a but, he said. You wouldn't be out here if there wasn't a but. I looked at the vineyard. It accumulates, I said. The version that isn't accurate. You say it enough times in enough rooms and it sits somewhere. Like sediment. I had told myself it didn't matter. Tonight it turned out it mattered a little more than I'd accounted for. He was very still beside me. The shadow thing, he said. Yes. He let out a breath. Caro, he said. He had not called me Caro since we were children. I said that because I didn't know anything better to say. Because I don't know what you do. Because in my version of our family you're the one who, he stopped, the one who what? I said. The one who went quiet, he said. After a certain point. The one who stopped explaining herself. I thought, he paused. I thought it was because there wasn't much to explain. I turned and looked at him. And now? I said. He looked at me for a long moment. Now I think you stopped explaining yourself because you didn't need to, he said. And the people who needed to know, knew. And I wasn't one of them. He paused. By your own decision. Yes, I said. Did you ever want to be, he said. One of the people who knew. I thought about this carefully. I wanted you to ask, I said. There's a difference. I didn't want to announce it. I would have told you if you'd asked. You never asked. He was quiet for a long time. That's fair, he said. Yes, I said. I'm sorry about the toast, he said. The shadow thing. I'm sorry. I said it because it was an easy laugh and I didn't think about what it actually said. I know, I said. That doesn't make it. No, I said. It doesn't. But I know why you said it. That's different from forgiving it and also different from excusing it. He nodded slowly. The insects continued, the light from the hall continued. The vineyard held its dark shape in the September night. Tell me, he said. About the work. Not the version you give people. The real one. I looked at him. It'll take more than a night, I said. I have time, he said. You're getting married tomorrow. After that, he said. I will make time. I want to understand what you actually do. I was quiet for a moment. All right, I said. He turned to face me more directly. Can I ask you something first, he said. Yes. Dr. Okafor, he said. He knew your work, he'd heard of it, before tonight. We have been in adjacent professional spaces for some time, I said. We had not met. But he knew, Daniel said. People in your field. They know. Some of them, I said. The people who would have reason to know. He was quiet. How many people, he said, in rooms I've never been in, how many of them know your name the way he knows your name? I thought about this. I couldn't give you a number, I said. But it's not nothing, he said. No, I said. It's not nothing. He looked at the vineyard for a moment. I've spent my career, he said, making people visible. Making the version of them that the room sees. That's the work, the right frame, the right language, the right moment for the right information. He paused. And my sister has been. He stopped. The opposite, I said. The opposite, he agreed. The thing that functions because it isn't seen. The infrastructure that holds up the visible response. Yes, I said. And I made a joke about it, he said. At my rehearsal dinner. You made a joke about a version of me that was incomplete, I said. You didn't know the full version. That's different from making a joke about the full version. Is it? I thought about this. Somewhat, I said. He almost smiled. Not the social smile, the real one, the Daniel of childhood who had a specific expression when he'd been honestly answered rather than managed. Caro, he said. Yes. When this is over. When we're back. Come to dinner. Bring whatever you can bring, whatever files, whatever you can show me, whatever version of the work you can actually explain. I want to start. I looked at him. Start what? I said. Start knowing you, he said. The actual version, the actual version. I had held the actual version for a long time, held it away from him specifically, from the family, from the occasions that had never quite been the right occasion. I had held it with the discipline of the work itself, the thing that functions because it isn't announced, the infrastructure that holds because it doesn't require an audience. But infrastructure that is never seen by the people who depend on it is still, at some level, alone. I had not thought about it in those terms. Tonight it seemed like the right terms. All right, I said. Dinner. He nodded. We stood outside for another few minutes, in the dark and the insect sound and the September air, and then we went back inside to the party that was waiting for us, which was different now from what it had been before. Not transformed. Not resolved. But different in the specific way of things that have been seen accurately for the first time, the new version carrying the weight of all the years of the old one, and both of them true, and the distance between them navigable, from here. Dr. Okafor found me before I left. It was close to 11. The rehearsal dinner was winding toward its end, coats being retrieved, cars being summoned, the specific dispersal of a successful evening. He was standing near the door. Dr. Reeve, he said. Dr. Okafor, I said. I'm not sure what the protocol is for this situation. There isn't one, he said. I took a liberty. I wanted to tell you directly. You didn't have to, I said. No, he said. I didn't have to. He paused. I spent 30 years in this field watching the people who built the systems get overlooked by the people who ran the responses. The response is visible. The system's work is invisible. In 30 years I met very few people who could do what you do and were willing to keep doing it without the recognition. The recognition isn't the point, I said. I know, he said. That's why I said something. Because people who believe that genuinely, who are not performing the belief but actually hold it, deserve, occasionally, to have someone else say it out loud. I looked at him. Thank you, I said. The work on the surveillance architecture, he said. The next generation of that infrastructure. There are conversations happening at a level I'm still adjacent to. I'd like to pass your name. I'd be glad of that, I said. He nodded. Enjoy the wedding tomorrow, he said. I will, I said. He left. I stood near the door for a moment, in the specific quality of stillness that follows something significant when the significant thing has ended and the ordinary has returned and you are in the space between them, assessing. Outside, through the windows, the vineyard held its dark rose in the September night. The work was what it was, the outcomes were what they were. The people who needed to know, knew, and one of them, tonight, had stood up in a room and said so. Which was not the point. But which was, I found, not nothing. ******. The wedding was the next afternoon. It was, genuinely, beautiful. The kind of beautiful that isn't only the setting but the people in it, Priya in a deep red sari that her mother had worn at her own wedding, Daniel in the specific stillness of a man who has arrived at something he had not fully understood he was waiting for. The ceremony was outside in the vineyard rows, under an arch of late summer flowers, with 60 people standing in the September light. I stood with my parents. My mother held my hand during the vows. Tightly, in the way of someone who has wanted to say something for a long time and is saying it the only way available. I held her hand back. After the ceremony, in the photographs, Daniel pulled me in beside him, not at the edge, where I would have placed myself, but at the center. His arm around my shoulders. He said nothing. He didn't need to. The photograph exists. I am in it. At the center. *****. A month later, Daniel came to Washington. He came on a Tuesday, which was not a convenient day for either of us, which was why we chose it, the midweek visit being a signal of a different kind of intention than the weekend visit, the social one. We had dinner in my apartment. I had prepared food because preparing food is a thing I do when I have decided to be genuinely present for an occasion rather than managing it from the outside, which was a distinction my therapist had once identified and which I had subsequently found to be accurate and useful. I told him about the work, not the full version. The full version belongs to the files and the colleagues and the years it took to accumulate, and cannot be transferred across a dinner table in one sitting. But I told him the architecture of it. The system's logic. The specific problem that surveillance infrastructure solves and why solving it requires the invisibility that makes it easy to misread. He asked good questions. Not all of them were the right questions, some of them were shaped by his professional instinct, the communications lens that organized everything into narrative and message and how it would land. I pointed this out when it happened. He adjusted. "You do that," he said at some point. "You just say it. When I'm framing it wrong." "Yes," I said. "Most people don't do that. Most people want you to like them," I said. He looked at me. "You don't?" he said. "I want you to be accurate," I said. "That matters more to me than whether you like me." He was quiet for a moment. "I do like you," he said. "I know," I said. "But I've been liking an incomplete version," he said. "Yes. And now?" "And now you have more of the complete one," I said. "We'll see how that goes." He almost smiled. "I think it'll go fine," he said. "I think so too," I said. Which was, given the years behind it and the distance that had accumulated and the joke at the rehearsal dinner and the stranger who had stood up and said the true thing out loud, given all of that, a modest claim. But modesty, in my experience, was accurate more often than not. And accuracy was the whole point. Had always been the whole point. *****. The work continued. It continued in the way of work that is structural rather than episodic, not the dramatic response, not the visible moment of intervention, but the slow building of the thing that makes the response possible. Files, models, systems, the long patient labor of infrastructure that functions best when it is never needed and second best when it is needed and works. Daniel called on Sundays now. Not every Sunday, neither of us was consistent enough for every Sunday. But most of them. He was learning the vocabulary of the work with the same instinct he brought to everything, the quick identification of what was essential, the compression of the complex into the usable, the ability to hold the new frame without losing the old one entirely. He was, I had always known, intelligent. I had not, until recently, let him apply it to me. That had been my choice. Made deliberately. For reasons that had seemed sufficient and that I had, in the years since, allowed to calcify into something harder than a choice, into a given, a settled fact, the way things were. A stranger had stood up at a wedding and unsettled the given. Not because he needed to. Not because I had asked him to. Because he had accurate information and the room had inaccurate information and the distance between them seemed, to a man who had spent 30 years in the field of public health, like a gap worth closing. Gaps worth closing. That was the whole of the work, in the end. The gap between what was known and what should be known. Between what had happened and what the record showed. Between the system that existed and the one that was needed. I had spent 15 years closing gaps. This one had closed itself. Mostly. The rest of it, the dinner table version, the family version, the specific accumulated weight of 4 years of my brother saying she lives in my shadow with the comfortable assurance of a man who has never had reason to revise the picture, that part would take longer. It had already started. That was sufficient. The work was what it was. The record was more accurate than it had been. Daniel was learning. Thomas would learn. The systems that needed to function were functioning, and somewhere in the Hudson Valley, a vineyard was moving into its October dormancy, the vines going quiet in the way of things that do their essential work underground and wait for spring. Which had always seemed to me like the right model. For work. For families. For the long patience of things that matter and do not announce themselves.